All right, let me have everyone's attention. First of all, as always, I want to welcome all of you to our annual Black History Month lecture series. The lecture series was really designed to ensure that students would have an opportunity beyond the large auditorium and, beyond the large scale operation that it takes to kind of do a presentation for the entire school. There's no real true engagement. And as a historian by training, I really wanted to provide students the opportunity to be able to interact and to ask questions. And those are not the type of things that you can do in a large setting. However, I'm so very passionate about Black History Month and the celebration of minority cultures in general. And anyone who knows me knows that. So again, this is a very exciting day for me, and also it will be for you as well. I know that you're going to enjoy this. So today, I know that there's been a whole lot of buzz around the movie, The Black Panther, but today we're going to learn about the real Black Panthers, not the Marvel comic, but the Black Panthers who, again, inspired the comic. Because, again, the Black Panther as a comic came out in 1966, which was the same year that the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And a lot of people leave out that part, for self-defense. That's what it was about. So again, you're going to learn. It'll be an interactive presentation, and we'll do a question and answer in between each presentation. So you'll be hearing 4 different presentations, one on the Black Panther Party, one on the Black Arts Movement, one on the Emmett Till case, and one on Brown versus Board, which are all going to be extremely powerful, and I know that you will enjoy. I thought I saw a hand up before we got started. Yes?
So that's the thing. So Black Panther, is it sort of like Malcolm X, where he doesn't want violence but believes it might be necessary?
Well, I'll let Huey P. Newton speak for himself. He once said, "The police have never been our protectors. So with weapons in our hands, we were no longer their subjects, but their equals." So I think that the situation, and the presenters will speak to it better than I, but the situation is that they were about self-defense. The violence that people really experienced was at the hands of the government, was at the hands of the establishment, was at the hands of also racists. So it's funny that the response to that kind of violence actually wound up them being basically looked at as the people who are violent. If I come over there and, let's say, struck you in your face, and then you punched me back and then I called you violent, it would seem crazy. But that's essentially what happened here. But again, we're going to allow the presenters to speak to that. Again, thank you, instructors, for taking time out of your busy schedules and to make a decision that, although I have curriculum and I have all these other things to cover, that you were really dedicated enough to ensure that your students became exposed to some very poignant history. So again, without further ado, I want to bring up our presenters, and we will do a question and answer in between each segment. So get ready. I want to introduce our presenters for the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. So my name is Yasmin Mitchell.
Kennedy Haro.
And we're both very excited to share our presentation on the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense with you all this afternoon. Does this work? Okay. So we thought an appropriate way to start off this presentation would be by quoting Bobby Seale, where he said, "We do not fight racism with racism. We fight racism with solidarity. We do not fight exploitative capitalism with black capitalism. We fight capitalism with black socialism. basic socialism. And we do not fight imperialism with more imperialism. We fight imperialism with proletarian internationalism. So the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was founded, hold on, no, this isn't working. Sorry. So the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was founded on October 15th, 1966 by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale in Oakland, California. A fun fact that most people don't know is that originally there were 6 members who founded it, which included Elbert Big Man Howard, Sherman Fort, Reggie Fort, and Little Bobby Hutton. However, as time passed, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale really emerged as the primary leaders and founders of this organization. Huey P. Newton was born in Monroe, Louisiana. He had 6 siblings. And during his time in high school, he had multiple suspensions and run-ins with the law as a teenager. He didn't really take his education seriously. However, nevertheless, he graduated from high school in 1959, but he was barely literate. And after graduating from high school, realizing that he couldn't read, he was really just not really doing anything with his life, he became really serious about his education and he became his own teacher, teaching himself to read, and went on to attend Merritt College in Oakland, as well as San Francisco School of Law, where he met Bobby Seale, and went on to further his career by receiving a PhD in social philosophy from the University of California at Santa Cruz in 1980, and he also wrote the book War Against the Panthers, subtitled A Study of Repression in America.
Robert Seale, also known as Bobby, he grew up in Dallas, Texas. He had 2 siblings and an abusive father. He moved to California and attended Berkeley High School, then later served in the Air Force, where he attended Merritt College in Oakland, California, and he formed his political views after hearing Malcolm X speak for the first time. And later, after meeting Huey P. Newton at a rally protesting for Kennedy's administration blockade of Cuba. Sorry. The Black Panther Party adopted their symbol after an independent political party established by the previous years by the Black residents in a county in Alabama. Their ideas were sparked by Malcolm X because he was, after his death in 1965, and he supported the Black Power movement, which stressed racial dignity and self-reliance. Their ideas also combined elements of socialism and Black nationalism and promoted strong Black-controlled institutions, calling Blacks for working together to protect their rights and ensure economic and social advancements. The Panthers also focused on emphasizing class unity, and they kind of looked down on the Black middle class who saw the Black Panthers as radical almost because they were fighting for the rights of poor Blacks.
The Black Panthers also kind of clashed with Black middle class because in those days, also kind of these days, the Black middle class kind of saw themselves as better than Blacks who might not be as wealthy, might not have as much affluence. So they really emphasized class unity because in the face of injustice, you don't need more division. They also welcomed alliances with white activists such as Students for a Democratic Society and later another group, because they believed that all revolutionaries who wanted to change U.S. society should unite across racial lines. Later, the Weathermen. So the mission.
This is, right here what you have is the Black Child's Pledge, and basically the Black Panthers focus on establishing a set of morals that a Black Panther would follow by, and young people like us looked up to the Black Panthers, and so they developed a pledge for children to learn and be able to recite. It basically establishes that you will give back to your people, you will fight for your people, defend your people and discipline yourself, learn how to carry yourself in public settings, and become the face for the Black community. The political views of the Black Panther, they were focused, as said before, on Malcolm X and what he taught. They fought racial and economic oppression. They their actions take place in the 10 points, which we'll get to later. Self-defense, fighting police brutality, and putting themselves on equal standpoint to combat the abuse from policemen. And also establish the rules and pledges to abide by and set examples for Black children in the community. And they develop allies in Cuba and Algeria and other places.
So the Black Panthers were really, really strongly rooted in community outreach. They created over 60 programs for economic and social political support to Black people, including ambulance services, health clinics, and schools. They were really strongly believed in these because they believed it was very important to sustain the community, because those who are only surviving can't fight for political views. So if you're fighting every day just to have enough money to make groceries get on the table, then you can't really fight for like a brother who was killed in the streets. So a few of their programs, one of the most notable that we still have today in our school is the Free Breakfast for Children program, which served in 19 cities then, which fed over 20,000 children for free. They got free breakfast before going to school. And we'll get into how the US government kind of dismantled that but stole this, and this is the main reason why we have free breakfast in schools today. Also, they created People's Free Medical Centers, which offered free services such as testing for high blood pressure, cancer detection screenings, physical exams, et cetera, which was really important for Black people during this time, as many were impoverished and couldn't afford to go to the doctor. So it really provided much needed health services that regularly they wouldn't have been able to afford. They created the Oakland Community School, which was the first and only Black Panther school that really enforced the idea of teaching true Black history, not so much the whitewashed version that many would get in public schools that we get today. Critical thinking skills, they really taught how to think and not what to think in their schools. They wanted their students to become self-reliant and to think for themselves. And students performed at the Oakland Community School on average on standardized tests better than other white and Black schools that were around. They created the Seniors Against a Fearful Environment program, which was started at the request of seniors that were fearful of being mugged while going to cash their Social Security or pension checks. And these seniors were actually told by police that if they were scared of being robbed while they were trying to walk to the bank, then they should just walk closer to the curb. And the program offered free transportation and escort services for the elderly in residence centers in Oakland, California. So that's another really good example of how the Black Panthers were really looking out for their community and giving back to the Black community. And finally, they created the free food program, which is similar to the free breakfast program, but it provided free food and groceries to Black and other oppressed people, not just Black people. And its intent was to supplement the groceries of Black and poor people until economic conditions allowed them to purchase good food at reasonable prices. Because then, as it is now, it's healthier food is much more expensive than cheap food that isn't really going to fuel your body. So they produced and provided an ongoing supply of food to meet their daily needs and had periodic mass distributions to hand out this food.
These are the 10 points. The first one says, we want freedom, we want power to determine the destiny of our Black people and oppressed communities. So basically they want to be able to determine like where they're gonna go in life as far as justice and all. The second one says we want full employment for our people, which is basically speaking to the idea of establishing more Black established businesses and allowing Blacks to be hired, because Blacks they met the criteria for many jobs that white people did not, but they were denied often for their skin color. And the third one says, we want an end to the robbery by capitalists of our Black and oppressed communities. So basically how white people use, they strategize to target Blacks to make money off of. So you can still see this today as far as the big tobacco companies planting cigarette, ads for cigarettes more in Black communities, whereas you would see less ads for cigarettes in predominantly white communities.
The fourth fourth point says that we want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. This one, in essence, is saying that they didn't believe that black people, or any people for that matter, should be trapped in ghettos that are run down without funding, where crime is abundant. They really were against that. Number 5, we want education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our own true history and our role in the present day society. So like they did in the Oakland Community School, they wanted schools that would teach not the whitewashed version of African American history or the great accomplishments that we've made, but also the true accounts of struggles that they were still facing then, as well as the ones that we still face today. Number 6, we want all black men to be exempt from military service. This one was really important because they really stressed the belief that they didn't believe that black Americans should be forced to fight for this nation if this nation isn't even respecting our basic civil and human rights. So that was a big one.
The 7th one is speaks to police brutality, which is very evident today. We want an immediate end to police brutality and the murder of black people, and you can still see this, which is well and alive today.
Also seen in this picture is they illustrate the police as pigs, which was a strategy of the Black Panthers by renaming the police as pigs. Although it might seem like slander, it was really appropriate because what they were doing was really corrupt. They were literally murdering black people in the streets. And by renaming them as the police as pigs, they were able to kind of take the fear away from the connotation that the police had. And so black people started calling the police pigs and started having less fear when the police were around because they didn't feel like, oh, it's the police. Now it's just, oh, it's the pigs coming to do some more stupid stuff. Number 8, we want freedom for all black men. All black men hold in federal, state, county, and city prisons and jails. This is mainly because then, and also now, there were many legal laws and policies that were created specifically to target black and minority communities, which contributed to mass incarcerations. So this point was really speaking on mass incarceration.
The ninth point says, we want all black people, when brought to trial, to be tried in court by a jury of their peer groups or people from their black communities, as defined by the Constitution of the United States. So basically it speaks to how when blacks do go to trial, they mostly get people that don't look like them, when your right says your jury should be people of your background, of the community that you live in. So they're speaking to the idea that instead of having racist white people and a racist judge, as you see the Ku Klux Klan here, determining their future as far as going to jail over small things such as marijuana, they would prefer to have, it's their right to have black people to sit in for them. The last one is we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. So it basically ties in and brings everything together. We just want to be black in America and live the same way our other peers are able to be free.
So the Black Panther Party wasn't made up of just men, although men are really focused and iconized. There were also female Black Panthers, and they were really essential to the progress and success of the Black Panther Party. The party's new leader was Elaine Brown, following the incarceration of Bobby Seale. And as it kind of started to decline, women really began to take over. They took larger roles following Newton and Seale's departure. By the mid-1970s, most active members were actually females. And they really sustained the party during the decline until its ultimate end in 1982. And they were also the backbone of the People's Medical Centers. They really supported that. That was their main mission. Opposition and demise. So the United States government, I don't know if anybody has heard of COINTELPRO, maybe an A-push, but the United States government created, in essence, what this is summarizing is the United States government created this organization called COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program, to destroy and dismantle black power groups, mainly the Black Panther Party. And it targeted communist parties, socialist workers' parties, white hate groups, and black nationalist hate groups, as well as the New Left. But of the 295 documented actions by COINTELPRO to disrupt black groups, 233 were against the Black Panther Party. So that really speaks for itself and what the organization's real goal was. And they even stated clearly that its primary purpose was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of the black nationalists. As well as COINTELPRO, the federal government took other actions against the Black Panther Party, some being that the California state government passed laws specifically against the Black Panther Party indirectly, such as the Mulford Act of 1967, which prevented citizens from carrying loaded firearms, which the Black Panthers often did to patrol the streets to make sure that police brutality wasn't going on and to stand up for black people who were being victimized by the police. They created divisions between Newton and Eldridge Cleaver, who was also a civil rights leader, by sending false letters and documents, as well as divisions between the Black Panther Party and other black unity groups, which eventually led to the murders of Al Prentice, Bunchy Carter, and John Huggins. They created these discourses between black groups in order to try and destroy it from the inside. So they were hoping that it would, if they couldn't get along, it would kind of turn into like black-on-black violence, and they would just destroy themselves. COINTELPRO and the CIA was also involved in the murder of Fred Hampton, which we'll go into later, who was the leader of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party in 1969. And they killed 28 Panthers and imprisoned many other members or forced them to leave the United States to avoid arrest on ridiculous charges, such as the Newton versus California case. And COINTELPRO and the federal government overall really contributed to the party's end in 1982.
So in this case, California versus Huey P. Newton, in 1967, Huey P. Newton was stopped by police officer John Frey, and during the interaction, he tried to remove the weapons that Newton and the people he were with were carrying, and the second officer arrived, because he called for backup. Sorry, excuse the bell. The second officer arrived, and then shots were fired, and then John Frey was killed, and the second officer, Haynes, was injured. Huey P. Newton was then charged with the murder, which he did not commit. During his trial, he advocated for a jury that reflected his background, and then the Black Panther Party began a Free Huey campaign in protest against his arrest. Later, Huey P. Newton was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 2 to 15 years in prison. In 1970, the California Court of Appeals ordered a new trial for Newton. Eventually, the case and the charges were dropped against Newton after 2 mistrials.
In 1968, the case called the Chicago 8 was really popular, which happened, in which Bobby Seale was arrested along with 7 other activists on the charge of inciting a riot outside the Democratic National Convention to protest the war in Vietnam. It wasn't just black nationalists. There was actually all 7 of the other protesters were white from different white liberal groups. Following his arrest, he requested that his trial be delayed so his lawyer could recover from surgery, and this request was denied, which was illegal because that is a right that you have when you're on trial. He then requested to represent himself in court, which the judge, Julius Hoffman, also refused, which is also illegal. And Hoffman ordered Seale to be literally bound and gagged. Hoffman then sentenced Seale to 4 years in jail for contempt of court. And when Seale was released from jail, he returned to Oakland, where he found the Black Panther Party decimated by arrests, killings, internal schisms, and successful efforts by COINTELPRO to destroy the organization. So while he was gone, while he and Newton were gone, the party really kind of crumbled on itself due to outside interference as well as internal conflict.
This is the life of Fred Hampton, who was also a prominent member of the Black Panther Party. He was born August 30th in 1948 in Chicago. He became the chairman of the Black Panther Party chapter in Chicago, Illinois, and Fort Illinois. He was an activist in the civil rights movement, and he advocated for the rights and justice of blacks. He used his street cred to unite black street gangs under the positive Black Panther Party cause, and on December 4th, actions of the COINTELPRO and the government. In 1969, the Chicago Police Department raided Hampton's home in the middle of the night and murdered him at the age of 21 while he was laying next to his wife, his pregnant wife. This quote down here says, I am not going to die on no airplane. I am not going to die sipping on no ice. I'm going to die for the people because I'm going to live for the people. I'm going to live for the people because I love the people.
Further internal conflict that occurred within the Black Panther Party was following his release from jail after the Chicago 8 ruling, he turned to nonviolence, which, while not completely against the Black Panther Party's ideals, it didn't necessarily advance their cause. Rivalries formed and violence occurred between the Black Panthers and other Black unity groups due to COINTELPRO manipulation. You know, the discourse and conflict that COINTELPRO was making up between these two groups, or these multiple groups, began to take its toll. Disagreements over the roles of women in the party began to arise, whereas some Black Panthers really supported the idea of women having strong roles within the party and having power. Other people, such as Huey P. Newton, thought that women should have lesser roles, so that was a really big source of conflict within the party. The party also began to centralize in Oakland, California, which meant that it kind of shut down the outside chapters. And in March 1989, Huey P. Newton was sentenced to a 6-month jail term for misappropriating public funds intended for a Panther-founded Oakland school. He actually was funneling money for a drug habit that he had developed, thank you, which is really unfortunate, and yeah. And in August 1989, Newton was found shot dead on a street in Oakland. People say, or it's said that he was killed during a drug raid or something, or a drug deal gone wrong. But there is speculation that the government could be and probably was involved with this murder. Their impact. So the impact on the civil rights movement that the Black Panther Party had was that they really created a stronger sense of community within the Black community. They made Black people aware of their political rights and duties. Their main focus was to know your rights in order to protect yourselves from abuse from the system, from the government, and from police. They structured the youth, as seen in the Black Child's Pledge and the Oakland School. They really cared about the youth and thought youth were invaluable in their fight for justice. They supported Black communities better than the federal government did, of course. And they forced the U.S. to acknowledge their oppression, as the U.S. basically created an entire organization just dedicated to trying to destroy this positive group. And they inspired change and government programs, as seen with the free breakfast program that we have today.
A musical influence led by the Black Panthers and other activists was during the times they used music to cope with things. And so you could see in the 50s and the 60s, A Change Is Gonna Come by Otis Reading. And then in the 90s, you had Tupac Shakur, NWA, F the Police, Sounds of the Police, White Man's Road, also by Tupac, and You Can't See the Pride in the Panther by Mos Def and Tupac. These beliefs that were campaigned by the Black Panther Party also continue on today. And in today's generation, by The Cops Shot, by Dead Prez, Redbone, Childish Gambino, Land of the Free, Joey Badass, and Neighborhoods by J. Cole, and Hurts My Soul, Lupe Fiasco. And this quote here by Huey P. Newton from one of his books, Revolutionary Suicide: Black men and women who refuse to live under oppression are dangerous to white society because they have become the symbols of hope to their brothers and sisters, inspiring them to follow their example. Any questions?
All right. Well, you know, it's a couple things. Speaking of that song by Tupac, one of the lyrics in that song is "Time to fight back." That's Huey said, 2 shots in the dark, now Huey's dead, and that's what made me remember what it was. But also, I mean, I feel like people forget, like the Black Panther was controversial, right? But I think what people realize is the reason why people don't realize is why there's so much violence in Black neighborhoods. Like, first of all, there shouldn't even be Black neighborhoods, but America segregated blacks and whites and put blacks in worse places, you know? And my question is, I mean, how was like, it has to do with socialism. Socialism is often viewed negatively, considering there are countries that are socialist. Why was a Black Panther socialist?
Well, I'll leave that to the presenters, and then I will respond.
In my opinion, from the research that we've done, the Black Panther Party really relied on socialist views due to the fact that the federal government wasn't protecting Black people. They weren't providing for Black people. They didn't care that there was Black people being thrown out on the streets or didn't have anywhere to live in these ghettos. Black ghettos didn't have any funding from the government. Really, nobody was looking out for them. And if anything, they were being targeted by police with violence. So the Black Panther Party really decided to look out for their own communities, and in order to do that, they needed to support their communities by giving them the resources they need so they're not just surviving, they're thriving. And so as they're thriving, they can fight for political justice that they needed, such as civil rights.
And to go off what my colleague has said, they used the ideas of socialism because it focused on what the community needed, whereas we fought for our voice because the government often shut us down. So socialism gave us a platform to vocalize the oppression we faced and call out the government for the hurt and damage that they caused.
And to sum it up, socialism really was the tool that they used to try and transcend the racism. So the socialism's focus on the community flies in the face of the free market system, which really operates on consumerism. And the idea of consumerism and the free market system where it creates haves and have-nots. And that's the whole point. And very often the haves, their wealth is generated off of exploiting the people who do not have in society. And because of the legacy of slavery and the 300 years of the transatlantic slave trade, all of the wealth that was generated during that time actually led to the development of the West. And this is why we are still one of the most prosperous areas in the world, because of the 300 years of the transatlantic slave trade and the exploitation of not just Black people, but oppressed people, many of the people in the Caribbean in terms of the Native Americans, the people that were indigenous there, the Caracas, the Caribs, the Tainos, all of those people were murdered and then replaced with Africans to work that land. So socialism was in fact a tool that they had studied at Merritt College.
I also feel I need to comment.
All right, what's your comment, sir?
Like, as I was saying, like, I feel that, the reason why there's so much, so many problems and all poverty and violence in Black neighborhoods is because of segregation. And I think what people don't realize is that the reason why people go at each other in those neighborhoods is that they're so impoverished and they can't get a job. And it gets to a point where they feel that they have nothing to lose.
Well, sir, I agree with you, and I'll share something that Kennedy said. He said, every man is disposed to live honestly if the means of doing so are available to him. And unfortunately, the means of doing so, just as you, I think, very eloquently pointed out, was elusive for many people, not just Black people. All right, well, in order to keep this moving, because we have a few other presentations, thank you, sir, so much for the question. All right, keeping it moving, do we have any other questions for our Black Panther presenters before we switch things out? All right, fair enough. Thank you very much to our two presenters. The Black Panthers, this is very inspiring for me. My family was involved in Black Panthers in the Newark chapter, and my aunt Hakima actually was mistakenly arrested because they thought that she was Joanne Chesimard, or who people know as Assata Shakur. And because my aunt actually looks a lot like her, so they thought that they grabbed her off of the street when she was leaving the headquarters in Newark on Market Street. And we had to work to get her out to prove that she was not Joanne Chesimard. So again, this hits near and dear to me. And as I saw the movie, I couldn't help but think that the oppression that they faced in Oakland is iron. For those of you who saw the movie, I'm not going to, not a spoiler alert here. But at the end, when you're talking about, the reason why Oakland was so important is Oakland is where the Black Panther Party was started. So that's symbolism, which is why it ended there. For those of you who saw it, you know what I'm talking about? If you don't know what I'm talking about, go see it. But anyway, I really appreciate you presenters and telling us the story about the real Black Panthers. Thank you so much. And again, we're gonna keep this moving. Our next presenters are gonna take the stage. All right. Well, we're gonna keep these presentations moving. Our next series is going to be the very powerful Emmett Till case, and the Black Student Union, as well as the government courses. We had an opportunity to go to the Museum of African American History and really looked at the coffin and the artifacts associated with the Emmett Till case. Very, very powerful, very powerful. And I know that our presenters are going to really do a wonderful job here, but I just want to say, just speak to the importance of this case in terms of it being the start of, I think, a more aggressive civil rights movement and a nonviolent direct action movement. Because once children die, you cannot just stand idly by. Claude McKay, I believe, said, if we must die, let it not be like hogs pinned in an inglorious spot. And the people stood up after this case. So once again, we're going to hear from Stacia Overton, Danielle Levenberry, Elise Levenberry, and of course, Jelani Page. So at this time, put your hands together for Emmett Till.
In the 1950s era, the years following after World War II, the economy was very, very high in the United States. Its prosperity was rising with new suburban living, automobiles, employment opportunities, but most of all, the interaction between African Americans and whites, because at this time, slavery was over. During 1950s, during this time that Emmett Till, the case happened, there was a great era of conflict between the African Americans and whites now that they were allowed to integrate into society. The white race was very determined to make sure that African Americans did not receive the same treatment or opportunities that white people did. They even went as far as to create Jim Crow laws to prevent them from getting the same opportunities as them in every aspect, such as education, institutions, schools, transportation, jobs, stores, and restrooms. And with the Jim Crow laws being implemented, the difference between how life was before the Jim Crow laws were and how it was afterwards was that it was now legal for them to treat African Americans any kind of way they wanted to, and they were subjected to all types of punishments such as racial death threats or slurs, lynching, and severe and crucial beatings, and any form of physical or violent punishment.
Okay. Hey, I'm Elise. So I'm gonna talk about Emmett Till, like the actual story of how it happened. So Emmett Till was born July 25th, 1941. His nickname was Bobo, and he lived with his mom, Mamie Till. His father was executed by the U.S. Army in July 1945 for the rape of 2 women and the murder of another in Italy. His mom made $3,900 a year, which was not really good, but it was okay for a black person, especially a single mom, back in those times. He attended an all-black middle school, and he lived in a middle-class neighborhood. On August 17th, Mamie was going on vacation and sent Emmett to Leflore County, Mississippi, to visit his 64-year-old uncle, Mose Preacher Wright. Emmett was familiar with segregation, but had no idea what discrimination was like, especially in the South. In the South, especially in Mississippi. On August 24th, Emmett went to Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market with his cousin and some friends to buy some bubble gum. Carolyn Bryant, a white woman, was working the store while her husband was making a delivery in Texas. Ms. Bryant claimed that Emmett walked into the store and bought bubble gum, and when he got to the door, turned around and wolf whistled and said, "Bye, baby." When her husband came back and heard what happened, Roy, Carolyn's husband, and J.W. Millman, his brother-in-law, pulled up to Preacher's house and said, "Get the boy who done the talking."
Preacher pleaded with them that he was from the North and he didn't really understand what was going on in the South and he didn't know the rules. And they threatened Preacher, and only 3 people know exactly what happened that night. And well, only 2 people know now because the third was found days later in a river with a 75-pound fan tied around his neck and shot in the face, unrecognizable. And this was a before and after picture. That's when they found him. His right eye was like totally like, his mom just couldn't recognize him. On August 31st, 1955, Till's body was found in the Tallahatchie River. On September 3rd, 1955, Till's mother ordered that Till's casket appear with the top lifted so people could see his horrible damaged face. And she said, "Let the people see what they did to my boy." And this was the fan that was tied around his neck. Oh, one more. At the trial, the 2 men claimed they only intended to frighten Emmett, not to kill him. But Emmett refused to repent even after being pistol whipped several times. Roy claims, "What else could we do? He was hopeless. I'm no bully. I've never heard N-word in my life. I like them in their place. I know how to work them, but I just decided it was time a few people got put on notice." On September 23rd, the all-white jury deliberated for less than an hour before issuing a verdict of not guilty, explaining that they believed the state had failed to prove the identity of the body.
I'm Stacia. This is Mamie Till's reasoning for opening the casket. Mamie Till wanted to show the world what Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam did to her son. She wanted to bring awareness to what was happening in Mississippi. Emmett's killing wasn't going to be just the next story dismissed and unheard of. She wanted the world to see what she had seen. Rayfield Moody urged Mamie Till to open the casket, and the funeral director, A.A. Rayner, felt as if she should close it. Emmett Till's mother could hardly recognize him for the damage done to his face and the rest of his body.
Okay. The impact that the death had on America, this was like a really big case. It basically showed the rest of the country what was going on in the South, like, because like people up here knew that it was bad, but they didn't know it was this bad. So the Southerners tried to like cover it up and make it seem like it wasn't that big of a deal. So some Southern journalists try to legitimize the trial by, in the verdict, like saying that it was an unfortunate incident. The Jackson Daily News said that all evidence against the defendants was circumstantial evidence, and the judge passed it with like admirable fairness. They wanted it to be forgotten as quickly as possible, basically. So after his death, membership in the NAACP rose like drastically. Black people that wanted to sit back and like not do anything before, like they just wanted to like keep living, like even if times were hard for them, they were like trying to just suck it up. They couldn't suck it up anymore after this, so a lot of Black people joined the NAACP. Black newspapers started to cover the story, and it inspired people around the world. I mean, people in America to take action. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "I think the Till jury will have an uneasy conscience. I hope the effort will be made to get out the truth. I hope we are beginning to discard the old habit as practiced in a part of our country of making it very difficult to convict a white man of a crime against a colored man or woman." So this case sparked the rise of the civil rights movement. The sight of his body pushed many who had been content to stay on the sidelines directly into the fight. 100 days, well, actually a lot of people don't know this, but like the story is like Rosa Parks was tired or she just didn't want to give up her seat. Actually, she didn't give up her seat because 100 days after Emmett Till's body, she decided that she wanted to do something, and she said, "I thought of Emmett Till's body and I just couldn't go back." That was the real reason that she didn't give up her seat, was because of the Emmett Till case. So, while this happened, the U.S. fought wars to prevent countries from going communist, and we were just trying to make it seem like we were this perfect country who treated all citizens like fair, and this showed how we didn't. We were oppressing our own people, and it just showed like a spotlight on the U.S. and how we really treat minorities in this country. So on January 24th, 1956, J.W. Milne and Roy Bryant, the two people who were on trial for killing Till, they did a confession, and they confessed that the men detailed how they beat Till with a gun, shot him, threw his body in the Tallahatchie River with a heavy cotton gin fan attached with barbed wire to his neck to weigh him down. They were paid $4,000 for this, which was a lot of money back then. And this was after they were found not guilty, so they couldn't get tried again for the same thing. And so the allegations that Emmett grabbed her hand and was basically like trying to be like disrespectful and like sexually crude. The woman, Caroline Bryant, said that that wasn't true. So basically all that happened for no reason. In our opinion, we feel that Emmett Till's death was a horrific event, but it had to happen in order for people, especially African Americans, to stand up to the violence against them and do something about it, which led to the Civil Rights Movement. The African Americans who were scared or wanted to remain neutral had no choice but to step up and fight after seeing Emmett Till and realizing that it could have been them. But now in 2018, we are still experiencing similar struggles. White people are killing our people, and they're getting off with not so much as a slap on the wrist. We have come far, but we still have so much work to do. People like Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Dontre Hamilton, John Crawford III, Ezell Ford, Dante Parker, Tanisha Anderson, Akai Gurley, Romaine Brisbane, Reed, Rodney King, Tony Robinson, Philip White, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray. Those are just some examples of the killings of our Black brothers and sisters that didn't get any justice.
All right, so let's give them a round of applause. These are some more think about questions. However, you don't have to ask those. Yeah. Certainly, you can feel free to ask whatever questions you have for the presenters. One of the things that I want to just point out as people make their way to the microphones is that this case is so very powerful, simply because it reminds me, and it reminded many people who got into the struggle for civil rights of what Paul Robeson had said just 10 years earlier. And when he was asked, well, how long will these lynchings and killings and brutal beatings occur? And he said, how long? As long as we shall permit it. So after this, people really rose up. And I know that the presenters mentioned this, but I want you to really think about the fact that she admitted that she lied. First of all, wolf whistling isn't illegal, okay? But he didn't even do that. He didn't do anything. And she lied. And he was killed. And they got paid $4,000. So they really became wealthy off of telling this story. And that to me is just a horrendous situation. But if we're going to believe in the jury, if we're going to believe in what a jury decides, then juries have to be right and just, and they have to represent a community of their peers. this was a travesty of justice. All right, at this time, we're going to entertain questions. If anyone has questions about the case to our presenters, please come on up at this time. All right, I recognize one question. Any more? Two questions. All right, and we'll close it off there. So you can come on.
This is kind of a dumb question, but like, if new evidence is brought to a trial, shouldn't it be reopened?
I mean, I agree, but
Well,
you can't.
legally speaking, like, for example, if someone commits a rape in like the 60s and there's no ADN to support it, and now there isn't the case reopened if people
Well,
confess?
I think that if it's like a mistrial or something,
Yeah, this
but
case
once
was
it's like,
closed.
yeah, once it's a closed case, I don't think
You
it
can
can
get
be
retried.
opened.
And I'll speak to the legality there. In the Constitution, the Founding Fathers were very intent on ensuring that people were not victimized by an overactive prosecution. So their point was to ensure that people would be free from what they call double jeopardy, which is you were, of course, in a corrupt system, it doesn't work, so that speaks to your point. But the way that it's designed, double jeopardy ensures that if, let's say, the evidence is presented, you had a jury of your peers from your community that, and some of them invariably would look like you, and that they've heard all the evidence and they've decided that you are not guilty, then they were not going to allow a prosecutor to keep trying you until they got the actual verdict that they want, which would be guilty, because then that could start basically people to be legally targeted, because after you go on trial, you get acquitted once, twice, three times. The fourth time, maybe a jury's like, well, they keep bringing this case, maybe he is guilty. And then you get convicted. And and for those of you who missed the earlier session on grace and justice on death row, which is very powerful, we know that we have a corrupt justice system. The lawyer chronicled the criminal justice system and the corruption that occurs between prosecutors and courts and police. He chronicled it very well, so we know that it exists. This is not the pink elephant. We know that racism in the criminal justice system is real. So as a result, the double jeopardy rule is in place to protect people who are innocent. Unfortunately, when you protect people that are innocent, sometimes the guilty also go free. Yes, and I recognize you for the second question. Yes, sir. Yeah, you have to come to the mic because we are recording.
So first of all, when you say the guilty go free, would you include OJ in that as well?
Is that a question for me, sir?
Yeah, you said the guilty go free.
No. What I said was that in a system that is trying to ensure justice, to avoid, sometimes the guilty people do go free. And to your point, sir, let me be very frank here. O.J. Simpson was tried by a jury. O.J. Simpson was on trial for over a year. The people that were on that jury heard all of the evidence the prosecution presented. They had their very best prosecutors to try and convict O.J. Simpson of this murder, of this double murder. And he was found not guilty. So as far as I'm concerned, he was not guilty because that is what the jury said. So as far as I'm concerned, I agree with the jury who actually heard the evidence and not people who watched it on television or heard the aftermath and made their own decisions. If a jury could be in a room and hear evidence presented for over a year and he be found innocent, then as far as I'm concerned, he's innocent of that crime.
Now, to another thing, like that was just something that popped up in my head when you said.
Not a problem. Okay, what is your question?
Do you think like sometimes with people like Emmett Till, do you think sometimes people, in the civil rights movement, they sometimes have to be like, I guess, the sacrificial lamb?
Well, I think that the presenters here made mention of the fact that as a result of as a result of Emmett dying, so many people got involved in the civil rights movement. So yes, I would say that some people wind up being sacrificial lambs. But you know, the problem with martyrs is that they are never around when you need them. Some of you will get that later. But the point is, when you're talking about martyrs, sometimes there are martyrs for a greater cause. However, someone that was innocent and young, like an Emmett Till, he shouldn't have had to lose his life over what amounted to be racism and a lie.
And even if it wasn't a lie, even if it wasn't a lie, that doesn't justify killing somebody.
Oh, no, absolutely, no. You and I are on the same page, my friend. Thank you very much for your question and comment. All right. And thank you very much. All right, everyone. So we have Kaden Washington, Nathan Joe, and Leah, who are going to present a very wonderful presentation on the Black Arts Movement, or BAM. This movement, a lot of people are familiar with the work, but not the movement unto itself. So for all of you writers and artists, remember that the duties of an artist are very powerful, because they chronicle the story in many ways of oppression and of people who are struggling. So what you're about to see is the Black Arts Movement, which speaks to me personally, but there's one thing I want to share. Nikki Giovanni said, we don't need any more poems about love. We need poems that can kill. Her point was that art for art's sake has no worth. We need art that pushes the envelope forward, and they're going to chronicle this movement for you. So without further ado, the Black Arts Movement.
Okay. Yeah, like Mr. Boss said, this is the Black Arts Movement, also known as BAM, and it started in 1965 and ended in 1975. So. Is it on?
It is now.
Okay. Okay. Oh, so I can't see anything. Okay. So what was the Black Arts Movement? It was a time during the Civil Rights Movement where African American artists used their art to peacefully fight injustice and tell their stories. And it officially began after the assassination of Malcolm X in 1965. And it's also, its beginning is also noted when Imamu Amiri Baraka founded the Black Arts Repertory Theater in Harlem. So African American literature. I think this poem by Amiri Baraka is really, it really speaks to the time and really speaks to the movement. So it says, clean out the world for virtue and love. Let there be no love poems written until love can exist freely and cleanly. Let Black people understand that they are the lovers and the sons of warriors and sons of warriors, our poems and poets, and all the loveliness here in the world. We want a Black poem and a Black world. Let the world be a Black poem, and let all Black people speak this poem, silently or loud. This is just an excerpt of the poem. It's much longer than this, but during this time, poets and novelists and writers weren't making art that was all lovey-dovey or soft. They were really using their work to fight injustice, so it was really hard-hitting and really spoke to the times. Some literary groups that came about during the Black Arts Movement was the Umber Workshop, which was a literary group with members including Ishmael Reed, Askia M. Tor, who helped found Afro World. Another group, the Harlem Writers Guild, another really prominent group with members including Maya Angelou, Audre Lorde, Sarah Wright. And this was one of the first organized groups of African American writers which aimed in spreading African American culture. So some notable poets that arose during this time, Gil Scott-Heron, a lot of you may know him from his piece, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. He's also considered to be one of the first MCs. Ishmael Reed, who I mentioned earlier, was a poet and novelist who aimed to represent neglected African American perspectives. Sonia Sanchez, another really prominent poet at the time, her book of poems, Homecoming, established her place in the Black arts movement, and she dealt with ideas of Black nationalism and Black separatism. She really utilized Black vernacular of the times. And Nikki Giovanni, who Mr. Baz mentioned earlier, she's referred to as the poet of the Black Revolution, and she was described by Evie Shockley as epitomizing the defiant, unapologetically political, unabashedly Afrocentric BAM ethos, and she really stressed Black unity. So some literary publications that arose, well, first off, these publications came about because a lot of Black literary works weren't being published because all the main media outlets were predominantly white and they didn't publish Black art, so Black people decided to make their own. So some publications that came about was Freedom Ways, The Liberator, Umbra Magazine, which all dispensed Black art. And Black Dialogue was the first major Black arts literary publication, which led to the creation of the Journal of Black Poetry. And Chicago-based Johnson publication, the Negro Digest, later labeled the Black World, was distributed nationwide. So Black art was getting to Americans across the nation. Dudley Randall's Broadside Press in Detroit published more than 400 poets, giving these artists their recognition, and Baraka and Larry Neal edited Black Fire, which is a collection of essays, poetry, fiction, and drama, and it's considered the anthology of the movement.
African American art. So basically, African American art were just visual arts the Black arts movement used in order to show the African American struggle instead of just voicing them. It all starts with the Black theater, defined as a theater of protest, a way to protest against the circumstances that Afro people were put in. The founder was Lloyd Richards. He was the first Black director on Broadway, and just a notable person would be Lorraine Hansberry, a playwright and writer, and she wrote The Raisin and the Sun and was really prominent during this era. Notable Black artists, classified as those who base their art on African and African American history. Vincent Smith, he portrayed the everyday life of African Americans. Faith Wrinkle, her works reflected her worries about the issue of color and the negative associations with the color Black. Elizabeth Catlett allowed her work to address social, political, and economical issues that were present in the lives of Black women. And Melvin Edward, who made sculptures that focused on the issues of race. A picture is worth 1,000 words. This picture here, I forgot who was it by, but basically what's great about art is that you can interpret it in any way you want to. So I saw a lot of interpretations, but one that I interpreted was that when you're younger, so right here, you're more innocent, as when you grow up, things get more violent, and you also get to see like who you can grow up to be versus who you might have started out as. So basically, I also got a picture from Faith Ringgold. She called it For the Women's House. So basically, it was 8 separate scenes, and each scene was like what the future holds for Black women, and mostly women in general. So basically, you can go from, and this was also during the 70s, so, you know, there was like house women, people who just basically were at home, but showing that women could be in sports, they could be police officers, they could be even the President of the United States, you know, one day. Next. Just keep going. Black artist groups, so there was Spiral, Wusu, and the Afro Cobra. They spoke to different Afro groups through artwork. Their artwork was often exhibited on walls, like with graffiti, and used pictures and paintings and sculptures and other forms of visual art to show instead of telling.
Okay, so African American music. All right, so music in this time period, when it arose, it was a lot of mainstream jazz, gospel, and soul, and also R&B, and it was used to unite and inspire Black people during this troubled time. Okay, so music back then was more of your blues, gospel, and soul. So for the blues, it got its start after Reconstruction when Black people in the South were still going through unjust and brutality. So that's why it sounds it gives the impression of sorrow and sadness, but also supplies some hope for better days. And some examples would be Ella Fitzgerald, B.B. King, Ray Charles, and Etta James. Gospel, the sound was derived from the times of slavery when slaves would sing of freedom. So like old Negro spirituals, and people during the movement would sing hymns like We Shall Overcome, which I'm sure a lot of y'all know what that is. To demonstrate unity and determination in soul music, which is still used today. Deemed as somewhat of a mix between R&B and gospel, it gave Black people a sense of racial pride and independence, and an example would be Curtis Mayfield's People Get Ready. So some musicians and some singers during this time. So for musicians, you had Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. So they were two of the earliest and most well-known musicians during this time. And this was also called the swing era. So their types of music was meant to lift people's spirits and allow for them to, kind of enjoy themselves, especially since what was going on around them. An honorable mention would actually be Graham Nash. He's actually a white guy, but he sang a song called Chicago, which was basically about the Chicago 8, which you heard in the presentation about the Black Panthers, which was a group of peaceful protesters that were arrested for rioting. James Brown, and this is when he recorded a lot of songs for encouraging during the movement after the murder of Martin Luther King. He released a song called Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And that has been deemed as a protest anthem, and that itself has unified many people. Also, Harry Belafonte, he's a singer and a performer, and he's now turned a social activist in America and overseas. So, one woman that is very incomparable and should have her own slide is Nina Simone, and she is deemed the most inspirational and influential artist of all time. A little background, she began her conquest performing when she was younger at church when she was 3. And towards the middle of the 60s, she was pegged as the voice of the civil rights movement. She wrote Mississippi Goddamn, and this was a direct response to the killing of a man named Medgar Evers, who was murdered for being a civil rights activist. She also is the writer of For Women, which was written through a perspective of an African-American woman, but each 4 represented a stereotype. And then that's the song, Mississippi Goddamn. I don't think we have time to go over it, but I do have time. I don't think we have time.
We don't, but it's a great song.
Okay, yeah, it's a great song, yeah.
So lasting impact. Overall, the Black arts movement created new subjects for African American studies at universities and colleges that weren't there before. It reunited the Black community with Black art and culture, something that we were kind of lacking for a while there, but the Black arts movement really brought that back. And it gave artists the chance to revive African American culture by channeling their African roots and creating their own path. And it really paved the way for hip hop in the late 80s and the 90s, and it inspired future media outlets for Black people by Black people. Okay, that's it.
All right. Once again, our presenters, I think, did a great job on the Black arts movement. And this just goes to show, for all you artists out there and writers, just make sure that you're writing to your passion, because the meaning will be much deeper, and it will resonate with other people. Because if you're passionate about a cause, write about it. And then, of course, you are encapsulating your feelings and emotions, and that can be transmitted through song or writing or even plays. So again, I want to encourage all of you to chronicle your truth through art. And at this time, do we have any questions for our presenters? It would be appropriate at this time. Any questions?
I know I talked a lot.
Well, if you have a question, sir, why don't you go ahead.
Come on, bro.
Okay, we got 2 minutes.
Take your time.
Guess not.
So, so just want to say one of the things that I saw that showed like the adults of different color fighting each other and the kids.
Oh,
you know,
the paint.
and the kids embracing each other. It reminds me of this thing I saw from Jimmy Kimmel, where he was talking about how, kids that, like when he was seeing what was going on in Charlottesville, and he looked at his kids playing with each other, with other friends, and it didn't matter what color they were. Do you think that, I mean, as we grow, do you think that it's possible that as we grow up, we don't get better, but we get worse in some regards?
Well, presenters?
So basically, what I have to say about that is I feel like it's probably the environment you're raised on. So depending on where you're raised and how you're raised, you may just get better, like the children, they were together. But say if one of the white kids' parents was like one of the parents like stabbing the black mom, they might just grow up to be just like their parent.
I agree.
All right.
I concur.
Once again, I'm sorry for...
No, you never have to apologize. You're good. You're good. You're honorary today.
Take your time. Take your time.
And I think our presenters answered it well, but I think that to respond to your question, I always like to go to the elders. And James Baldwin, who wrote The Fire Next Time, and a noted writer, he said that children have never been good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. So again, I think that we can all pay lip service to certain things, but in terms of your question about getting better or getting worse, I think that generally children model themselves after their parents' examples. So again, if you want to change the world, start in your homes, because the ruin of a nation starts in the homes of its people. All right, so having said that, how much time do we have, Ms. Jones? None. All right, fair enough. Oh, and we had one more presenter. We had one more presenter, so I don't want to shortchange him. However, looking at the time, I do want to bring him up maybe so he could speak to at least what he would have built on, and then we'll close it out at this time. The Brown versus Board of Education. So Jalen, if you could maybe show us maybe your first couple of slides and a quick synopsis, and then for those people who are interested, we'll actually ensure that he has an opportunity to give the presentation at a later date. I'm gonna work it out. I'm gonna work it out because this is very good. I'm sorry we ran out of time. Okay, Mr. Mays.
All right, how y'all doing? So yeah, as y'all know, I did Brown versus the Board of Education. And it started off with a little girl named Linda Brown. Linda Brown was an African-American girl from Topeka, Kansas, who had to endure harsh conditions because of her race. She had to walk 1 mile to school every day, and she had to cross a railroad track just to go get an education. The situation is even more sad considering that there was an elementary school 4 blocks from where she lived. However, the school was for white people only. So Oliver Brown and the NAACP. Oliver Brown is the father of Linda and Cheryl Brown, who also walked this hike to school every day. Any good father would hate for their children to go through this. So Oliver decided to take action and contact the NAACP, who were already working towards integrating schools in America, and decided to outline their actions of equality in the education systems based off one specific case right here, Plessy versus Ferguson. So Plessy versus Ferguson was a separate versus equal, and they decided that segregated facilities are okay as long as both areas are under equal conditions. But I mean, that's not what happened. As you see here, you could probably guess who went to the left and which kind of people went to the right. So the separate versus equal was a whole lie. The schools for African Americans were dilapidated and usually cramped about 30 kids in a room that could only fit 15. The textbooks were run down from the white schools after they got old. The schools made for the blacks was a visual representation of the treatment we had been enduring for centuries. So as you see, this don't look like a good learning environment to me. I don't know about y'all, but yeah, that's what they look like. So Oliver Brown and the NAACP filed a lawsuit against the Board of Education in Topeka after Oliver and other parents were constantly denied the opportunity for their children to integrate with white schools. This denies their constitutional right, as the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment states that no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So, all right, this is gonna be my last one. The Board of Education at Topeka's, their argument was that segregation is in full effect everywhere else, so segregating the schools would prepare them for the segregation they would encounter as adults.
The United States District Court of Kansas decided that because of the separate but equal doctrine, the school board did not have to integrate, and that segregation within the schools was totally fine. The district court also said that transportation resources and classroom conditions were the same and were not unfair. After Oliver Brown lost against the Topeka Board of Education, he decided to take his case to the Supreme Court. It was there that he realized how many parents were fighting for integration. The Supreme Court decided to merge 5 cases that dealt with the same issue: Belton versus Gibbert, Brown versus Board of Education, Boylan versus Sharp, Briggs versus Elliott, and Davis versus County School Board of Prince Edward County. Thurgood Marshall was chosen to represent Oliver Brown in the spring of 1953, as you know. Thurgood Marshall would become a Supreme Court judge himself in 1967. The case started in the spring of 1953. However, the Supreme Court judges constantly postponed it so long that one judge died during the case. This man was Fred Vinson, who didn't want to rush it because he knew the severity of the case. A man named Earl Warren was his replacement, who was appointed by Dwight D. Eisenhower. Even though the case was introduced in the spring of 1953, the trial didn't begin until December, almost 10 months later. Now, Earl Warren was the man who influenced the Supreme Court members to come together. He was so dedicated to the job, he visited one of the Supreme Court members in a hospital who had a heart attack, just to influence him to move towards integration. On May 17, 1954, the United States Supreme Court came to a 9-0 unanimous decision in favor of Oliver Brown. This overturned the Plessy versus Ferguson clause. Now the question I'm gonna leave you with is, are schools integrated today? I say no. Just because that law was established, we forget that this own school didn't integrate until around the 70s.